You have tuned into Transitions 2. I am Martiqua, and I thank you for joining us. We are, in this version of Transitions, discussing issues related to transitioning while on the job and how the Human Resources Department of the company that you may work for can help you, or should be helping you, to make your transition on the job as smooth as possible. And just to give you something to think about as we start this session, there was a study done through the University of Minnesota where it was determined that only 6% of all people who begin a transition actually have the surgery completed. That's a really small percentage.
Mm-hmm.
This person next to me is Dr. Diane Kelly. She is our resident transgender expert.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And she's here helping us present the information to you through a program that she created with a partner to educate human resources departments on the best way to assist their employees in their transition. And we're going to continue with that presentation now.
Okay.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. In our last show, we had talked about 1 in every 2,500 males in this country between the ages of 18 and 60 as being a post-op transsexual. And that only incorporates, like you said, 6% of all people at the University of Minnesota that we had done our study with. Only 6% ever completed the surgery. So basically, if 1 in 2,500 is a post-op transsexual and only 6% have the surgery, what about the other 94% that don't? If we factor in those that don't have the surgery, now we're up to approximately 16 people for every 2,500 males in this country who has transgender tendencies. And the prevalence, we do know it's a growing concern. It needs to be addressed by every employer in order to assure proper transition protocol and policy. In order to keep productivity high in the company and disruption to the workplace at a minimum, that's why we do this. Let's talk some more on prevalence. At present, we have 28 surgeons in the world doing sex reassignment surgeries. We have 9 here in the United States, 2 in Canada, and 17 in other foreign countries. At present, about 800 male to female sex change surgeries are now performed in the United States each year. And that many and more are performed overseas where the care is excellent and the cost is somewhat lower. Currently, we have 1,500 to 2,000 U.S. residents undergoing SRS, sex reassignment surgery, each year. And in addition to that, we have at least half that many going from female to male. So it's pretty prevalent. Some other alarming statistics. 1 in every 12 transgender people will attempt suicide at least once in their life. Now, this is an old statistic, and neither I nor any of my researchers no longer believe this to be true. We feel it is a whole lot higher, much higher.
Well, that it has to be said that usually when you're reporting information like this, you have to rely upon it being reported to someone who can then record it. Reporting information like this is very sketchy and difficult to obtain. It becomes better as technology makes it easier to report anonymously.
Right.
Would you not agree?
That's correct.
So that would have to be part of the reason why you have arrived at the conclusion that it must be higher, because technology has now made it easier to report, so we have better information to fall back on.
The other statistic that we came across is approximately 12 to 15 transgender people are murdered every year in the United States. It's We consider it a hate crime. I don't think the government does. But 12 to 15 a year is a lot of people being killed because of hate. And that's why I do these seminars. Also, I might add, in 2004, they got 38 of us that year.
Wow. And if you consider the fact that the government doesn't consider it a hate crime, if you are correct in that, then you can imagine that with that being the government's stance, it's not very likely that a lot is done, or that it's harder to see prosecutions happen, it's harder to see laws changed, it's harder to see palliative care and other things that are done for the victims achieve their results, because you don't have the support of the government agencies.
When we do the segment on hate crimes, we'll go into that more, Martiqua. Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Some of the other conclusions that we came up with is that transsexualism is common enough that large schools and companies encounter transitioning cases. Many universities and colleges in particular have seen recent transitions among faculty members who have tenure, and they can do this without risk of losing their job. Many companies have transgender, transsexual training in place in order to assist their employee in transition, as well as policies in place to protect them. This is a slide that shows various colleges and universities that have protection for gender identity expression.
Yeah,
And there's quite a few companies in there. There's a handout that goes with this too, where you can actually see the different companies.
okay.
But there's a lot of big name companies.
Well, and it's good to know that that list is growing and
Every year.
attitude is changing, and so you get a better response.
Absolutely. And these are the corporations. I have listings too for all the corporations, and like you say, it's going up every year. More and more companies are doing this. More and more colleges are doing this. Let's talk about what a transsexual has to go through prior to the surgery. They have to follow the Harry Benjamin standards of care. That's a must. And that's set up by an international medical board.
Okay.
And no doctor is going to violate it. None. The person has to undergo counseling by a psychologist with a PhD in transgender psychology. That's required. And start hormones with the permission of the psychologist and the medical doctor. And at the university, we usually do this about 6 months into therapy. 6 months of counseling before you can start the hormones.
Okay.
If you have other problems, like you're into drugs or alcohol, they'll make you dry out for a year before they'll even grant you hormones. You have to prove to them. Other considerations, electrolysis. You've got 300 to 500 hours of electrolysis on having the little hairs barbecued out of your face or other places. It's expensive, it's painful, and very time consuming. Laser, that's another form of hair removal with less lasting effects. It just doesn't work as good. And laser can't see white hair. So those have to be taken out by electrolysis.
Okay.
And some people have, and this is elective, facial feminization surgery. Okay, then they have to begin living full-time in the opposite gender role for a period of a minimum of 1 year. And that's when the patient's going to come to the Human Resource Office and ask for their help. They have to obtain letters from 2 psychologists
Okay.
recommending the surgery, and one of the psychologists has to have a PhD in transgender psychology, and the other one has to have a minimum of a master's
Wow.
in transgender psychology. Then they have to find a surgeon who specializes in this type of surgery, and the surgeon also has to agree to do it, and they have to have the letters to accompany that. Lastly, they have to get financing for this type of surgery.
And you know what, before we move on, I have to say that hearing of all of these, well, for lack of a better term, checks and balances, a system of checks and balances,
Yep.
it makes me very happy to know that that structure exists, because it helps to assure that someone who is considering the process of transitioning not only has a support system in place through organizations and professionals and family members and friends, but also that they are psychologically, medically, physically, spiritually ready and prepared for these changes to happen. I'm very pleased to hear that those standards are established and that they're adhered to. It makes me feel very gratified to know that there's that much structure to the process.
You really need it though, because you're going through a major life change. And once you go through that change, it's too late to try to go back after that's done.
Right.
Now, the surgical financing is interesting. Some insurance companies have coverage for this type of surgery in the private sector.
Oh.
You can save money for it if you want, or borrow from your bank if you can talk them into loaning you the money. It's not cheap. Sex change surgery is pretty expensive. You're looking at anywhere from $18,000 to $30,000 depending on where you go and how much you have done.
Right. Wow.
If you work in the government sector, which is what I did for 20 years, the insurance expressly forbids this type of surgery.
Really?
And it's one of the points of contention that we fought for years and never won. They consider it cosmetic. So let me ask you this. If you go in for a nose job or a breast implants, do you have to have letters from 2 psychologists? No. So it's not an elective procedure. It's something that really needs to be done. So the proper procedure to transition gender on the job. First, prior to living in the full-time role, the person has to come to the Human Resources Office and declare that they're a transgender person. And then they're going to ask for the Human Resource Office to help them. The Human Resource Office will set up a meeting with all of the employees that you work with, and they will hire a sensitivity trainer like myself to come in and do training with all of the employees. And the trainer will have the person who is transitioning read a letter of intent that they intend to transition their gender, that they've had a gender identity disorder for years, and this is what they intend to do about it. And then from there, the sensitivity trainer will take over and do the session. Now there's certain things that the trainer can do and cannot do. And we've learned this the hard way. Through different transitions, things that you just don't do. Let's talk about the things the trainer should do. Number one, he has to explain that no one is being forced to accept anything here. We're not trying to change your religious or moral views at all. We're just telling you, don't act on them in the workplace. We explain that all it is asked is that the people address the person in the desired gender and do their best to relate to the person in that desired gender. Respect the person for having the courage to go through this, because this takes a lot of courage. And lastly, we settle any issues with the other employees, such as bathroom issues and things like this. That's what we do. And things that the trainer should avoid, and these are big no-nos, you just don't do this. You don't show slides or presentations on the actual surgery or how it's done. I've seen this done in different sessions. This was done when I transitioned, and we brought in a PhD. I'm not allowed to legally represent myself. They showed slides of the surgery. It had traumatized my inspectors to the point where it took me 2 years to get them to open up and tell me what took place, because I was asked to leave the room. I do not ask the transgender person to leave the room. I want them in there, and I want them all hearing the same story.
Right.
Sexual orientation of the individual should also never be discussed. It's not an issue. We're talking gender transition, not sexual orientation. Neither issue should be brought up or discussed like that.
I'm going to stop you for just a second. These are really sensitive issues.
Very.
They're really sensitive and really personal. They can be really painful and really hurtful if they aren't handled properly. And I know when we were preparing for this, I had some questions about why it was important not to show the slides from the surgery and not to get into that process. I would like you to tell the audience what you said to me as an answer.
Showing slides of sex change surgery can gross out people. They don't want to look at the blood and the guts, and looking at genitalia being removed and redone is very offensive to some people. And so you can't show slides like that. And so how I get around that is some people are offended, others aren't. It's best to just assume everybody is offended. Refer them to a website. And I'll refer them to Ann Lawrence's website or Lynn Conway or any, well, actually do one of the surgeons. Ann Lawrence has a real good website on this.
She's wonderful.
But a lot of your surgeons, Marcy Bowers has a website, and you can actually see, if you're curious, you can go in there, and then if you're offended, too bad, because they'll warn you right up front. Don't go in here if this is offensive to you. And that way it gets you off the hook as a trainer and the transgender person.
Right, because then they're not looked at as an object of revision or...
Right. And let's say you want to do your own gender transition sensitivity training, which is what I wanted to do. I was well equipped to do it, but I couldn't. Because legally it makes me liable. Anything goes wrong, these people are offended, I can be sued because I messed up my own transition.
These are really important details to be aware of. And honestly, I'm willing to admit to our audience that many of these details I didn't know. And that was part of the reason why I insisted on having Diane share her answers to my questions with you, because I figured that if I had these questions, certainly there must be someone in our audience who has them as well. Because some of us are of the personality to want to be an educator anyway, if we have an opportunity to do that. And so we might automatically feel like, who is better suited to talk about educating a group of people on what is happening to me except me? And it was important for me to hear the legal ramifications of making that decision, and that's why I encouraged Diane to share that with our audience as well, because you put yourself at great legal risk. And I really appreciate your sharing that with us. That was one of the biggest pieces of information that I got from this. And I think we're going to have to stop now, and we'll segue to our next program. But once again, I would like to thank you for the time and the effort that you put in not only presenting this to an audience and sharing it with us, but creating it, spending the time, effort, money, knowledge to put something together that is this important and impacts so many people. And as we said earlier in the session, gives them the structure and support that they need to step out and begin their transition on the job. So thank you very much, Diane. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining us, because this is really an important issue. And it was important to me to get to share it with an audience and give all of you a chance to understand that there is structure connected to this process, and you do have support and encouragement and legal issues to consider before you transition either on the job or even beyond it. So I thank you for joining us today and learning with me about this information. Come back and join us again as we finish the presentation and share more information with you. Bye now.